personal point of privilege to say how much I appreciate you. So thank you for being here today. The Department of Homeland Security and its dedicated employees play an essential role in keeping our country safe. We must ensure that they have the resources necessary to keep doing that work and to safeguard our nation from rapidly evolving security threats. Today's hearing is an important step towards that goal. This morning, we will examine President Biden's 2025 budget request and assess what the Department of Homeland Security needs to fulfill its critical missions in the coming year. I'm pleased that this proposal includes several investments to combat persistent threats in Michigan, as well as all across the United States. For instance, cyber attacks continue to pose serious threats to the homeland. This past February, a ransomware attack on Change Healthcare disrupted thousands of pharmacies and hospitals. Last summer, Microsoft faced a dangerous intrusion into its cloud system. And as always, cyber attacks from criminal organizations and foreign governments pose a great danger to our citizens. It's critical that the Department of Homeland Security receives the resources it needs to bolster cybersecurity. And I'm glad to see this budget includes significant resources for CISA, our nation's leading cybersecurity agency. We also have a chance to discuss the department's plans to secure our northern and southern borders. The irregular flow of migrants at our southern border continues to put a strain on law enforcement officials as well as neighboring communities. Members of this committee, Senator Sinema and Senator Langford, worked incredibly hard to negotiate a bipartisan border bill this past year that would have been the most significant border bill in decades to strengthen our presence on the border. And I'd certainly like to take a moment just to thank them. Senator Langford, Senator Sinema, thank you for your hard work in developing that compromise. Unfortunately, that compromise didn't move forward, and unfortunately, I have many colleagues who like to talk about solving a problem, but would much rather just throw rocks. It's just so much easier to throw rocks than actually solve the problem. So unfortunately, even though the bill had the potential to make substantial changes in our immigration system and would have also provided critical resources for our frontline operators, partisan politics got in the way, the rock throwers got their way, as opposed to the problem solvers. These longstanding challenges, however, are now more serious than ever, and this budget will give us a chance to actually meet them head on. President Biden's budget request includes resources to hire more law enforcement officials, updating our screening technology, and keep fentanyl from reaching our communities. We also have to commit resources to our northern border. And as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I was proud to secure funding to establish the Northern Border Coordination Center, which will create one unified entity that focuses on keeping our northern border secure. I look forward to hearing Secretary Mayorkas' insight into the security needs of both of our borders, both northern and southern. Natural disasters and climate change continue to present some of the most serious threats to the homeland. I've been proud to work with DHS on efforts to mitigate damages from natural disasters and held a hearing earlier this year on the devastating effects of wildfires across our country, and certainly appreciate the work Senator Romney has put into that issue. We must continue to strengthen our disaster response efforts, and I look forward to discussing how this proposal helps continue that work. We also have to address the threat posed by unmanned aerial systems, more commonly known as drones. Whether they're used recklessly or controlled by an operator with bad intentions, drones can pose a serious security threat to mass gatherings like sporting events, concerts, and more. The current authorities we need to address this problem are going to expire this May, and I'm going to keep working to reauthorize and expand them so that we can continue to protect our citizens, our airports, and our critical infrastructure from this growing threat. Secretary Mayorkas will provide a key perspective on how to address this increasing threat that drones pose to our communities. And finally, the threat of domestic terrorism is more serious than ever. The war in Israel has heightened tensions here at home, leading to a spike in anti-Semitic, anti-Arab, and anti-Muslim hate. And at the same time, white supremacist and anti-government extremists continue to pose a significant domestic terrorism threat to the United States. I've been proud to work with the department to address this problem and ensure that we are adequately tracking the danger that it poses to our citizens. I'm glad that this proposal includes resources for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, initiative I helped establish that gives organizations and houses of worship the resources they need to stay safe. And I look forward to hearing how else we will reduce the threat posed by domestic terrorism. So these are just a few of the examples of the many security threats that face our nation, and the solutions that have been proposed in the President's budget will be a major topic for us to talk about today. I look forward to having a productive, professional discussion today about the department's plans to continue to keep Americans safe. With that, I'd like to now recognize Ranking Member Paul for his opening remarks.
Secretary Mayorkas, yesterday your impeachment trial ensued in the Senate. I don't see this as a happy day or a day that I take relish or pleasure in, but it's a sad day in the sense that it's come to this. This isn't a debate over policy. This was a debate over malfeasance, a debate over whether you've been telling the truth and whether you've been enforcing the law. We have a disaster at our southern border, a disaster that becomes very personal to people. Lake and Riley's family, this disaster cost them the loss of a loved one. We have a disaster where people show up at the border every day and they just simply say, hey, I'm Joe Smith from Venezuela, and then they waltz on in. There's supposed to be rules. There are rules about paroling people. Under the Trump administration, a very small number of people were paroled. Under this administration, it's become a blanket parole. There's been the question, and you've been asked repeatedly, you testified to Senator Graham last year that parole is individualized. But then the administration has admitted that it's a public benefit to have migrants come in as migrants as opposed to illegal aliens, as if it's a difference. You know, a million people come by and we don't see them at all, and a million people come by and they stop and we give them migrant status, and somehow that's better, and there's a public benefit to that. But that's not individualized. That's judging people as a group. But I can't help but be sad for Lake and Riley and her family who didn't have to have this. And he wasn't paroled for any of those reasons. And we're going to get into that in the question and answer. You've either said you don't have the knowledge, you've been asked about this multiple times, but we're going to ask again, how did the murder of Lake and Riley get into this country? And what is the statute that allowed you to do it? How could you? And how could you sleep at night, you know, having done that? You know, there are laws. I mean, and that's what this is about. It isn't about whether or not the Biden administration believes in an open border policy. It's about whether we have laws and you're going to enforce them at all. The last administration was enforcing the law, and you just haven't been enforcing the law, and millions of people are coming across, and they've committed heinous crimes and murder, and Lake and Riley's family will never get her back. And yet that man came in and apparently was let go because they said it was full. There's no statute saying that when the camps are full, you just let people in. We have a system where we're just saying, hey, what's your name? And then we fingerprint you and then off you go. I mean, we had over 300 people on the terrorist watch list come in and then are found at a later date to be on the watch list. We have people coming to New York. We fly them to New York. We give them money. We put them up in a hotel. They assault a police officer, and then as they come out past the cameras, they're flipping the bird to everybody in America. That's a sad day for America, and you've presided over this. You've presided over just a disastrous border. And it isn't a matter of policy. It isn't a matter of you like open borders and we like, a more secure border. There's a law. We have a law, and you're supposed to enforce that law. And yesterday was a sad day because the majority went ahead and set the precedent that having lied to Congress, there wasn't going to be an examination of whether you lied to Congress. They were just going to simply say lying to Congress didn't rise high enough to be high crimes and misdemeanors. Chairman says, oh, we're just throwing rocks is why we didn't fix the border policy. That's just not true at all. The fix that was advanced legislatively was a fix that would have allowed 5,000 people a day before we would have taken extraordinary measures to try to slow the influx of migrants. But even after 5,000 a day, it was going to let migrants of no limit still come through the ports of entry. So it really wasn't a reform, it was a whitewash. All of the laws that existed under the Trump administration still exist under the Biden administration. You have all the powers that you need. The laws on accepting migrants to this country says the executive may admit migrants. Doesn't say the executive branch shall admit migrants. You could simply say we're full up, and we've got too many criminals, and we've got the horrendous thing that happened to Laken Riley and to others. And we're just full, and we're going to stop taking migrants for a while until we can sort out the mess we have at the border. You have every power to do that now. You just don't utilize those powers. But it isn't about really being good at utilizing the power. We just think you're not obeying the law. And I think it is a sad day. Yesterday was a sad day that we had to impeach a member of the cabinet. But today is a sad day that the majority chose not to even hear the arguments, not to see the proof one way or the other and have a real trial. So I look forward to trying to get some of the answers today, and I hope you will tell the truth. I hope you will not just simply say, I don't know. You've been asked many times about Laken Riley's family. You should know everything about the alleged murderer, and I hope you'll explain to us how he got into this country and why that happened.
Secretary Mayorkas, it's the practice of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses. So if you'd please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is the 7th Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Secretary Mayorkas has led a distinguished career over 3 decades as a law enforcement official and a lawyer in the private sector. He has served as the department's Deputy Secretary, as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and at the Department of Justice as Assistant United States Attorney in the Central District of California. Thank you once again, Secretary, for being here before our committee. You may now proceed with your opening remarks.
Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Paul, distinguished members of this committee. Every day, the 268,000 men and women of the Department of Homeland Security carry out our mission to protect the safety and security of the American people. They protect our shores, harbors, skies, cyberspace, borders, and leaders. They stop fentanyl and other deadly drugs from entering our country. They lead the response to maritime emergencies. As we speak, they are engaged in the response to the tragic Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore. They help communities recover and rebuild after a natural disaster. They combat the scourges of human trafficking, forced labor, and online child sexual exploitation, and so much more. All this despite a perennially insufficient budget. The dedicated public servants of DHS deserve full support, and the American people deserve the results a fully resourced DHS can deliver. The funding opportunities outlined in the President's fiscal year 2025 budget for DHS are critical to meeting both goals. I welcome the opportunity to discuss this proposed budget and highlight some of its key proposals with you today. When our department was founded in the wake of 9/11, the threat of foreign terrorism against high-visibility targets was our primary concern. That foreign threat persists, but now we also confront the terrorism-related threat of radicalized lone offenders and small groups already resident here in the United States. This budget provides for an $80 million increase to our department's nonprofit security grant program and additional funds for targeted violence and terrorism prevention grants so that DHS can better help communities prevent tragedies from occurring. As lone actors and nation states increasingly target our critical infrastructure and our data, the President's budget provides CISA with needed funding to improve our cybersecurity and resiliency. Fentanyl is wreaking tragedy in communities across the country. DHS has interdicted more illicit fentanyl and arrested more individuals for fentanyl-related crimes in the last 2 fiscal years than in the previous 5 combined. The President's budget includes critical funding to advance our strategy, including funds for non-intrusive inspection technology and targeted operations. During a time when the world, including our hemisphere, is experiencing the greatest displacement of people since World War II, DHS has toughened our border enforcement and is maximizing our available resources and authorities. In the last 11 months, we have removed or returned more than 630,000 individuals who did not have a legal basis to stay, more than in every full fiscal year since 2013. The President's budget would further expand these efforts. It provides funds for hiring more enforcement personnel and bolstering refugee processing. Our immigration system, however, is fundamentally broken. Only Congress can fix it. Congress has not updated our immigration enforcement laws since 1996, 28 years ago. And only Congress can deliver on our need for more Border Patrol agents, asylum officers, and immigration judges, facilities, and technology. Our administration worked closely with a bipartisan group of senators to reach agreement on a national security supplemental package, one that would make the system changes that are badly needed and give DHS the tools and resources needed to meet today's border security challenges. We remain ready to work with you to pass this tough, fair, bipartisan agreement. Finally, extreme weather continues to devastate communities. Last year, FEMA responded to more than 100 disasters. Our budget provides $22.7 billion to assist community leaders and help survivors in the aftermath of major disasters, and additional funds to invest in resilience strategies that will save lives and taxpayer money in the decades to come. Essential to our success across all mission sets is our department's ability to recruit and retain a world-class workforce. In addition to the frontline border workforce I mentioned, the President's budget includes $1.5 billion to maintain our commitment to fairly compensate the TSA workforce. The recently passed 2024 budget, though welcome and helpful to many of our operations, was enacted too late to implement an appreciable hiring surge. It reduced by 20% much-needed support for cities dealing with migrant-related challenges, and it cut critical research and development funding. I am eager to work with you to address these and other shortfalls in the weeks ahead, as I am eager to deliver the sustained funding, resources, and support that the extraordinarily talented and dedicated public servants of DHS need and deserve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. So for committee members, we will start the first round of questions. Our intent is, as we traditionally have when the Secretary is here, 2 rounds for questions. But I have a lot of members that want to be here, and this is a very challenging time for everybody's schedule. So I'm going to be very strict on the time, the 7 minutes on the first round for everybody. If everybody would try to adhere to that in respect to our colleagues who all want to ask questions. We will then take a break before the second round to give the Secretary some time and to roughly 10 minutes. We're going to try around 90 minutes, so whatever comes first, and we'll play it by ear, but my intent is to do that. And then it's just 5 minutes. Whoops, there we go, on a motorcycle. And then there's 5 minutes in the second round. And once again, I'm going to be more aggressive than I usually am because of the interest in this committee to make sure that we stay to the time. And I will start by leading by example and staying within my time. Secretary Mayorkas, I am focused on ensuring that the DHS and DOJ have the authorities needed to counter the evolving threat posed by unmanned aerial systems or drones operated by bad actors. Your department's current UAS authorities are set to lapse on May 11th of 2024, leaving upcoming major events like the Indy 500 and the New York City fireworks on July 4th unprotected from this growing drone threat. So my question for you, sir, is what would losing this authority mean to our combined efforts to protect the homeland?
Mr. Chairman, the loss of our authority to counter unmanned aerial systems would leave us less secure and less safe. The proliferation of unmanned aerial systems for adverse uses has only grown. The capability of those systems has only increased with respect to speed, distance covered, payload carried, and we need that system quite compellingly.
Secretary, fentanyl continues to, as you're well aware, to be a scourge on our communities all around the country. Far too many families, including in my home state of Michigan, are losing loved ones to this epidemic, and we certainly must increase our efforts to combat it. And while I appreciate the DHS's operations, such as Blue Lotus and Operation Apollo, I believe they've resulted in seizures of over 5,500 pounds of illicit fentanyl in the first 2 months of FY24 alone. Clearly more needs to be done. So my question for you, Secretary, looking at DHS's FY25 budget request, I'm concerned that the department is relying on Congress to pass a supplemental appropriation to advance the fight against fentanyl and synthetic opioids. So my question is, how will you ensure that DHS has the resources it needs to address this challenge if Congress fails to take action, as it unfortunately has in the past?
Mr. Chairman, we do the most with what we have. We engage in strategic operations. We maximize the use of non-intrusive inspection technology. We deploy forward operating labs. We use our transnational criminal organizations to work with international partners. The men and women of the Department of Homeland Security do so much with the limited resources they have. But let me assure you, Mr. Chairman, that the Senate's bipartisan legislation would have provided us with vitally needed additional resources to combat fentanyl, a scourge like no other that I have seen, even throughout my 12 years as a federal prosecutor, prosecuting narcotics trafficking organizations and drugs ranging from cocaine to black tar heroin.
Sir, Secretary, last year I released a report on watch listing and screening practices of individuals at our nation's airports and ports of entry. This report included concrete recommendations that DHS should implement to enhance our national security while also upholding travelers' dignity and rights. It recommended DHS reform the redress process, track screening activities in a holistic manner to assess their impact, and establish a watch listing and screening advisory council. My question for you, Secretary, is what actions has DHS taken so far to begin to address these three recommendations in the report?
Mr. Chairman, we very much appreciate the report that was published, and we are certainly acting upon it. It is our highest purpose to ensure the safety and security of the American public, and to do so while complying with civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights. We in the Department of Homeland Security are looking internally at our own practices, CBP, TSA, and the other agencies involved with the offices of civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy, and we are also working with other departments and agencies with respect to the recommendations and the important recommendations that the report issued.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I still have remaining time, and I'm going to set an example. I'm going to stop early on remaining time. And I do need to leave temporarily to attend a Armed Services Committee hearing that's going on now. So I will be turning the gavel over to Chair Emeritus, Senator Carper, in my absence, and recognize right now Ranking Member Paul for his comments.
Secretary Mayorkas, under your administration, the Biden administration, over 1 million people have been paroled. What is the criteria you use for paroling individuals?
Ranking Member Paul, the parole process is one that we execute according to the law. We make individualized determinations with respect to significant public benefit or an urgent humanitarian reason.
So for what reason was the alleged killer of Laken Riley, Jose Ibarra, paroled and allowed to come into this country?
Ranking Member Paul, first and foremost, all our hearts break for the family of Ms. Riley. Secondly, the perpetrator of this heinous criminal act needs to meet justice to the fullest extent of the law, and I will not comment on the particulars of the case because the matter is being prosecuted by authorities now.
This isn't on the case of whether or not he murdered her. This is on the case of why you paroled him. Why was he paroled?
My same answer, Ranking Member
You're
Paul.
refusing to answer the question?
I have provided my answer, Ranking Member Paul.
You're refusing to give any specifics about Jose Ibarra. Well, I have the documentation, and the document says that the subject, the person accused of killing Laken Riley, was paroled due to detention capacity. It was full. So is detention capacity statutorily allowed to be used as a reasoning for parole?
Allow me to assure you that individuals who pose a public safety threat or national security are our highest priority for detention. The reality, not just with respect to this administration, but every administration that precedes me, is that the number of encounters has exceeded the number of detention beds available.
The question is it statutorily, legally allowed to use the excuse that our camp is full? He was paroled due to detention capacity. Is that allowed under the law?
Ranking Member Paul, my prior answer stands.
Which means you're not going to answer the question. Are you pleading the Fifth Amendment?
No, Ranking Member Paul, I've answered the question. That
Well, no, you haven't. The question is very specific. You have testified previously, and you have testified today, that there are two reasons you can be paroled: urgent humanitarian need or significant public benefit. That's not the reason listed. The reason listed is parole due to detention capacity. Is parole due to detention capacity a lawful reason for paroling someone?
Ranking Member Paul, there are different bases for parole. I am not a legal expert in this regard, but let me assure you that when an individual is encountered at the border and they are deemed to be, at the time of encounter, a threat to public safety or national security, they are a priority for detention. If not, they receive a notice to appear and are placed in immigration enforcement proceedings. The number of individuals encountered at the border exceed the number of beds available in our detention facilities. That is not something specific to this administration. That is something that has been true.
You might have more beds if they remained in Mexico. Did the administration, when you came into office, reverse 92 executive orders of the Trump administration, which allowed them to apparently have people remain in Mexico, allowed them to have, probably 90% less parolees than you have? And so when you come to us and you say, oh, gosh, if we only had more legislation, we could do it, why don't you bring back the executive orders of Donald Trump that seem to be working? You immediately got rid of them for political purposes. The border's a disaster. Why don't you bring back the 92 executive orders that you reversed?
I respectfully, Ranking Member Paul, disagree with the premise of your question.
That's because you refuse to look at the facts, and it's still, I guess, insulting to all of us and insulting to the memory of Laken Riley and to the memory of others who have been killed by people who came into this country. March 2nd, an illegal alien who got into the country as a getaway killed Washington State Trooper Christopher Gadd. Haitian man who entered the U.S. via the CHNV parole program was arrested for sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl. March 21st, illegal aliens in El Paso rushed the fence. You saw that on national television. An illegal alien on March 23rd murdered 25-year-old Michigan resident Ruby Garcia. Chinese national came across the border and illegally breached a military base in California. I mean, the stories go on, and I think a lot of people in America are going to be appalled, that you refuse to answer the questions. Jose Ibarra, was it lawful to parole him? Was it lawful to let him in the country because you say the camp's full?
Ranking Member Paul is a former federal prosecutor for 12 years. I can say with tremendous conviction that individuals who commit criminal acts need to be held accountable for their crimes.
Well, that's not much consolation if you wait until after he's murdered somebody. See, part of the problem is, and I think people would be aghast to know this, that when you come in, you just give people your name, right? It's the honor system. There may be some databases you check, but certainly most of the domestic crimes in Venezuela probably are not in any kind of international database. So if you waltz into the country through your generous parole programs and say, I'm John Smith from Venezuela, you have no way of ascertaining that, and you still let them go. So you say, well, we're going to make sure that they're not a violent criminal. You have no way. You look in some databases, maybe they're not in the database, but you have no way of even knowing if that's their name. Then you give them biometric, you give them, you give them fingerprints. Now they have a new name and fingerprints. They essentially have been given a new identity by your agency. I don't know. I'm just so sickened and sad by the families that have lost loved ones from this. I don't see real remorse. I don't see you're willing to answer the questions. I mean, if it were me, I would be so upset by this. I would be doing everything possible to make sure that another Jose Ibarra doesn't get in. But apparently you let his brother in too, and his brother's got a rap sheet 10 times longer than Jose does. And so, I don't know. All I can express is disappointment and bewilderment that the Democrats let you get away with it.
Mr. Secretary, welcome. It's good to see you. On behalf of most of us, I think, in this body, thank you for your service. You've taken on one of the toughest jobs of anybody in the government of our country. I'm a big believer in bipartisan solutions. My colleagues have heard me say it over and over again. Bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. I believe that is true. And I'm not interested in having talking points or getting on television. I just want to solve problems. And this is one of the problems that I'm going to not run for re-election, as you may know, this year. And on January 3rd, 2025, I will be a free man. Not a free man in Paris, but a free man in Delaware. And I hope that we have dealt with these issues in a constructive way that will actually work. I just want to say, while Senator Langford is here, just my heartfelt thanks to him, to Senator Sinema, and also to Senator Chris Murphy. They spent literally not days, but weeks, maybe even longer, working with the administration and particularly with you to try to find a bipartisan solution that could, or a series of bipartisan solutions would help us address these issues. This is a shared responsibility. It's not all on the secretary of this department or even the people who work in this department. It's a shared responsibility. It's a shared responsibility between the executive branch and the legislative branch. I've been privileged to serve on this committee since it was first created, to lead this committee, and when we're at our best, we work together. We work across party lines, and we need to do that in this case as well. Let me just ask if I can, Mr. Secretary, to think back on the last several weeks, months, as you worked in concert with the three of my colleagues that I've mentioned, three of our colleagues whose names I've mentioned. What are some of the, as we turn the page and say, well, let's actually try to solve this problem, address this issue, and resolve it. What are some key lessons that should emerge for us from those negotiations?
Senator Carper, the Senate negotiated bipartisan legislation would have been transformative. It would have been transformative in two primary regards. One is the provision of resources to the Department of Homeland Security and the other departments and agencies in the federal government that administer immigration law. It's not just additional Border Patrol agents and Office of Field Operations officers within U.S. Customs and Border Protection, but it's over 4,000 asylum officers, more immigration judges, as an example. In addition, and very importantly, it would have changed the system, the broken system, dramatically. One of the greatest infirmities of our current system is that it takes multiple years between the time of encounter and a final adjudication of an asylum case. The Senate negotiated bipartisan legislation would have taken that multi-year process that draws people to the United States, and it would have shrunk it to sometimes less than 90 days in duration. And that changes dramatically the risk calculation of intending migrants. It would have empowered us to use expedited removal, a speedier yet fair process for individuals not just in immigration detention, but for those outside of it as well. A transformative piece of legislation that was extremely tough, yet fair.
Let me just thank you for that. Most of us go home at the end of a legislative week, wherever we're from. I go home almost every night and come back the next day that we're in session. I've been doing this for, gosh, 23 years. And I feel lucky to be that closely tied to my state. One of the things I do, I suspect our colleagues do as well, the days that we're not in session, I'm all over Delaware. We have only three counties. We have 1 million people, and we have a county day for each county during the week. And I visit businesses large and small. I visit schools, medical facilities, and so forth. But one of the questions I ask at these visits, I call them customer calls. I ask, how are you doing? I ask, how are we doing in Congress? And what can we do to help? And more and more I hear a constant refrain. Businesses, large and small, and other employers say, we just need somebody to come to work. That's what we need. And I would say, in terms of a shared responsibility, if we're really serious about helping to meet the workforce needs of employers, large and small, in our different states and communities, one of the things we could do is to pass bipartisan legislation dealing with workforce and with immigration. That would help us in a legal way provide a legal path for people to come and stay here for a while, not necessarily become citizens, but come here and work, and then meet the needs that I hear every week from our employers. One quick question, and I'll pass it to our next colleague. But can you just take a minute to please speak to the importance of not only funding the DHS budget request, but passing a bipartisan border deal so that the department can be properly resourced to carry out its border security missions? Could you please?
With respect to the bipartisan,
the importance of not only funding the budget request, but passing a bipartisan border deal.
As Senator, as I articulated before, it would add significant resources to our department that are significantly needed, not just at the border, but in the asylum process, so that we can adjudicate those cases more rapidly and remove individuals who do not qualify for relief within a shorter period of time. And that has a dramatic impact on flows to the border.
Good, thanks. And the last thing I would say before I turn it over to Senator Johnson is just a heartfelt thank you to your family. I can't imagine what it's been like for them to go through this, literally the last 5-6 years, but thank you to all of them. With that, let me turn it over to Senator Johnson. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Emeritus. Mr. Secretary, you've seen this chart before. This chart not only shows just the undeniable reality of the catastrophe of your open border policy, but it also shows cause and effect. You know, dating back to 2012, the unlawful deferred action on childhood arrivals, that's what sparked all the subsequent crises. But I want to focus in the crisis that President Trump faced because of DACA, because of the reinterpretation of the Flores settlement. He was rapidly, the number of apprehensions or number of encounters at the border was rapidly increasing to peak in May of 2019 at about 4,800 per day. By the way, back in 2014, Obama hit his humanitarian crisis, and you were part of when he was Assistant Secretary, 2,200 a day. And President Obama called that a humanitarian crisis. But President Trump took action. He used the existing authority, although weakened by the Flores settlement reinterpretation, he used that authority and he secured the border. By April of 2020, we were down to a little over 500 individuals encountered at the border per day. 500, from almost 5,000. When you entered office, you reversed all those successful policies and you opened up the border and you've created this catastrophe, and it is a catastrophe. You know, 6 million people, more than 6 million people, 31 states have a population less than the number of people you've let in, you know, flooding these sanctuary cities. So I've got a very simple question. Why did you do it?
Senator,
why did you reverse those policies? Why did you open up the border? Why did you create this catastrophe?
Senator, I respectfully disagree with the premise of your question. We did not open up the border. Senator, we enforce the law. We are facing...
Do you deny you reversed the Trump policies that had secured the border?
No, Senator.
You deny that?
No, Senator. That is not what I said. We enforce the law. We are dealing...
You reversed the Trump policies that had secured the border.
Senator, if we can look at your chart, I cannot see the bar graphs. Forgive me, the chair is blocking them. But the former president's Remain in Mexico policy was implemented in January of 2019, and 2019 saw an almost 100% increase in the number of encounters over 2018.
Mr. Senator, it went down to 500, and then with COVID, he started expelling people under Title 42, which, by the way, you canceled, and you didn't have to do that. Let me ask you another question. Senator Paul was talking about Lake and Riley. I mean, I on the floor of the Senate, read a list of a dozen people in the last 4 months publicized murders, rapes, a 2-year-old caught in the crossfire, crimes committed by people in this country illegally. That had it not been for your reversing of the Trump policies, for your open border policy, those crimes would have been committed. I've got another simple question. Do you ever, when you go to bed at night, do you have any regrets? Do you have any remorse for your complicity
Senator,
in these crimes? I mean, your open border policy has aided and abetted the murder of Americans, the rape of Americans. There are people have lost their loved ones because of this catastrophe, this open border policy. Do you have any remorse? Do you have any regrets?
Senator, 2 points. One, very importantly, all of our hearts break for the victims of these heinous crimes and their loved ones. Secondly, the criminals who committed those crimes are responsible for their criminal conduct.
They wouldn't have been into this country had you not allowed them in through your open border. Do you ever call up the families of the crime victims? Do you ever talk to Lincoln Riley's family?
Senator, as I stated previously, all of our hearts break for the loved ones of those who have been lost at the hands of criminal conduct.
Good. Okay, so your heart is broken. Do you have regrets? Do you admit your culpability here? Do you admit that your actions have resulted in the deaths and the murders and the assaults of thousands of Americans? I've got the CBP statistics here. Assault and battery up 5.7 times over the last few years what it was in 2020. Homicide up 17 times. Again, these are from keep people in this country illegally. Sexual offenses up 2.5 times. Again, that's the direct result of your actions, of President Biden's actions. Quite honestly, of actions of Democrats in the Senate who refused to vote to complete the wall, which would have helped. It's not the full solution. The full solution is actually having a president and Secretary of Homeland Security that wants a secure border. Our problem is we have a president, a Secretary of Homeland Security, Democrats in Congress, who want an open border that caused this problem, and they won't admit it. They won't admit it. President Trump had the authority, used that exact same presidential authority to open up the border. Now you refuse to secure the border. And by the way, this bipartisan bill, let me paraphrase, pretty accurate quote of Senator Schumer to Politico. He said, we were playing chess, they were playing checkers, and we got our Ukraine funding. And we're in a lot better shape than we were 3 months ago on the border. You weren't negotiating to secure the border. You were negotiating for political cover for yourself, for President Biden, or for the Democrats in the Senate and Congress. That's what you were doing. You were not serious. If you were serious about securing the border, you could have done it. By the way, if you were serious about having a closed border, a secure border, you would have let it remain secure. You would have left those policies that worked, that secured the border, that would have allowed us to establish a functioning legal immigration system. But you blew it all up, and that's the result. That's the result. That's the catastrophe. And you've been denying before this committee repeatedly that this isn't even it's not even a problem, Senator. It's a challenge. This is a catastrophe, and I cannot believe you have no
Senators
remorse.
expired. Senator Langford.
Secretary Mayorkas, you and I have spent a lot of time together. I would dare say that you and I have spent more time together than anyone on this dais. You and I both know there are things the executive branch can do, and there are things that Congress can do to be able to attack this. The challenge becomes trying to get those things implemented to be able to do it. There's a rumor that's out there that the administration's considering a change in 212F authorities, and that there may be some new executive authority used during this time period. Can you give us some insight of what that might be and what is under consideration?
Senator, I'm very proud of the time that we spent together negotiating what would have been a transformative solution to our broken immigration system. We in the government consider consistently all the time what options are available to us. That is the responsibility of good government. We have not made any decisions that I'm in a position to announce today, but I can assure you that we consider all the options before us in executing our responsibilities to the American people.
Do you have an idea of a time period when that might be implemented? I know you're making some considerations on that. When would we know?
There has been no decision made yet. I don't have a time frame to present to you.
There were clearly, as Senator Johnson mentioned, there are clearly differences in how President Trump enforced the border. There's also differences in how President Obama enforced the border than how it's currently being done now through the same executive authorities of things that are out there. The negotiated agreements with Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador at the time that President Trump had achieved, we don't have that same kind of agreement with them. I've had some Guatemalan leaders that have reached out to me and said, we want to reestablish some of those same type of agreements that are there to be able to get that. We don't have some of the same enforcement mechanisms. I know the court stepped back in and said the Remain in Mexico, the MPP, we've got to be able to reinstitute. The facility was changed on it, but the enforcement is different. There are differences that are there. I think what needs to be done here is President Biden, DHS, to use all the levers that you have to be able to enforce the border, as President Obama did and as President Trump did. This Congress also has a responsibility as well. What we had negotiated together was doubling the number of deportation flights, dramatically increasing the number of detention beds, increasing agents, increasing officers, increasing the number of immigration judges, increasing asylum officers, changing the definition of asylum so that there's a more rapid turnaround in that process, changing the process for expedited removal so that you're not hamstrung with some of the court decisions that have been made in the past. All of those things were dramatic changes that Congress needs to do. So I've been hard on members here to say we've got work that we've got to do, but you and I have had frank conversations as well to be able to say there are things that the administration can do. I encourage State Department to be more focused on recalcitrant countries and turning people around. I encourage Department of Justice to be more clear on enforcement of things that they're not doing either right now. But the frustration that you hear from the dais here is a sense that, yeah, Congress has things that we need to do, but we don't feel like State Department, DOJ, and DHS is using every tool at their resource. So I would tell you, we're eager to see the 212F and what is being determined at this point and what can be done, because this last number I saw, I think we had about 5,800 people that crossed yesterday. And so obviously that's an intolerable number for everybody on it. If I can ask a quick question as well, you and I have talked several times about special interest aliens. This is a different group out there that's been difficult to get information about. It's a group that DHS has defined for a while as folks with a potential for a national security risk. We understand there are thousands of individuals that have been designated as a special interest alien, but we can't get any information on it. This committee that has the oversight has had one briefing on it, and it was last year. That was a bipartisan briefing, and Senator Sinema and I worked for months to be able to get that one classified briefing on it. Since that briefing time, we've asked for follow-up, and we've gotten nothing on it to get details. How many special interest aliens? Where are they coming from? What are the details on those? These are folks that your team has identified as a potential national security risk. We don't know how they're being handled, but it is our understanding thousands of them are being released. Can you give us any clarity on that, and can you give us a time that we'll be able to get access to that information about those folks?
Senator, I'm very disappointed to hear that you feel that we haven't provided you with the information you've requested with respect to special interest aliens, I will work with my team to ensure a briefing of those of you who are interested in this very important subject in an appropriate setting.
Great. We have followed up. I have a list here of the number of requests. We've had 6 formal requests to your office just this calendar year, and every time we've not received an answer to it. So we absolutely need more information about this, because that's a very special concern to us, to try to figure out how do we actually get that resolved. On the budget request that's coming out, when you and I worked on the supplemental piece, we included funding for 50,000 detention beds and for deportation flights to be dramatically increased. Part of the issue was, obviously, if we're releasing people, especially single adults, it just increases the number of people that are coming. If we don't turn people around, there aren't immediate consequences, then more people just come because there's a delayed consequence, which is really no consequence. So my question is, in the budget request, we're to 34,000 beds for budget request. Why that number when we know we could get up to 50,000, or at least to 40,000 we could get up to? Why a lower number in a budget request rather than the number that you know you need?
Senator, you know, the budget is, of course, presented under the context of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Our 2025 budget was presented before the 2024 budget was enacted. We fully support the 41,500 detention beds that were presented in the fiscal year 2024 budget. I continue to believe that in the context of the Senate's bipartisan legislation, the 50 or 55,000 beds was an advancement in our efforts, and we look forward to working with this committee and Congress on funding the detention beds that are needed.
I hope that's so. We've got to be able to get that resolved. That's a serious issue that only Congress can resolve, but we've got to be able to implement. We need the White House to also make the request on it. One last thing I'll just ask for the record, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, on this. DHS Ombudsman for Citizenship and Immigration Services found this statement: the parole programs that are currently being used at our southern border that are allowing more people to come in, the parole programs require diverting funding and employee resources within USCIS from other immigration programs. We've experienced this in our office. It's become harder for legal immigration, and the Ombudsman is saying it's because some of these resources are being funneled to the border processing parole there. Love to have a statement back from your office in writing on if that's true, what's being done to be able to change it. If it's not true, why is that not true?
Thank you, Senator Langford, and I appreciate trying to stay on that timeline. I appreciate that. For those of you who weren't here, we have, our colleagues are all trying to, everybody wants to ask questions. Everybody is scheduling tightly, so if you try to stay to your time, I would appreciate that. Senator Romney, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, in the last 3 1/3 years, during your term, there have been more illegal aliens released into the country than under the 4 prior presidents combined. I know there may be some in the country that applaud that, but I believe that, frankly, if President Biden is to be turned out of office, it will be largely because of that failure on your part and his part as the person who's responsible for policy. I believe, and I think the great majority of the American people believe, and that reason why I think it's such a political bomb for the president, that this is an extraordinary crisis and failure. Do you believe that the numbers that you saw that Senator Johnson put up, that huge increase in the number of illegal aliens being released into the country, that is a crisis and a terrible problem?
I have, Senator.
That's a yes or no.
Senator, I have said previously that it is a crisis, and it is something that we work to address every single day.
Good, thank you. Let me turn. The House, I believe, House of Representatives, took action to underscore the extent of this crisis, and the Democrats decided they didn't want to spend more time talking about that. But I'm going to ask you a couple questions. They're not intended to be hostile, but the House said that you lied when you said to the House in a hearing that the border was secure. Why did you say the border was secure? Was that a lie? What do you mean by that?
Senator Romney, allow me to assure you that I have honored the oath of office that I have taken more than 5 times in my 22-plus years of federal service.
Let me go back to the question. That's as accurate as it is irrelevant, which is, my question is, you said that the border was secure. what did you mean when you said the border was secure? Is that not a lie?
Senator, you've asked me now if that is a lie, and I have assured you that I have honored the oath of office that I have taken.
In what way was it not a lie then?
Senator, with the resources and authorities that we have, it is as secure as it can be.
Thank you. Second question. The law states, and the House correctly noted, that encounters at the border and people seeking parole and so forth should be detained, and yet you release them. Why did you release them?
Senator, we release individuals into immigration enforcement proceedings when our detention capacity cannot meet them in detention, and they do not pose a threat to public safety or national security based upon the screening and vetting that we perform at the border.
Clearly, that screening and vetting was insufficient given the number of murders and other crimes committed by a number of those people so released. But is there a law when the detention facility is full? I understand why you say I can't put them in detention, which the law requires, if there's no more detention space. But does the law indicate what you then do? Because under President Trump, they were sent back to Mexico, as I understand it, and under your administration, they were released into the country. Am I wrong in that assessment?
Yes, you are, Senator, respectfully.
You want to explain in what way?
Of course, because I believe, and I want to be accurate in the data that I provide to you, and so I will verify subsequent to this hearing, Senator. I believe that a total of approximately 70,000 people were processed through the Remain in Mexico policy, and the balance were either detained or placed into immigration enforcement proceedings on a non-detained docket with a notice to appear. That is something that has been characteristic of our broken immigration system.
Do you have any sense of the proportion? How many were sent back to Mexico and how many were released into the country?
I would be pleased to provide that to you subsequently, Senator.
That would be helpful. The law also, and the House correctly noted, that asylum seekers should be evaluated individually, not released en bloc, and yet they were released en bloc. Why is that?
Senator, I don't know to what the House was referring, because we make individualized asylum determinations. Our asylum officers are trained to do so based upon the facts presented to them in each case.
Well, I would refer you to the articles of impeachment, which I presume you've had the chance to read. Is that right?
Actually, I have not read the articles of impeachment.
I probably want to do that because it alleges that you did not follow the law of the United States of America, and either you or your legal counsel ought to read that to make sure that you are following the law of the United States of America. But it indicates that individuals are to be evaluated individually and not let go or not released into the country en bloc, and yet it says that you did release en bloc large numbers of individuals into the country that should have been individually evaluated. Is that the case or not the case?
That is not the case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've used my time.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Senator Romney, a great deal, and your colleagues appreciate it. Senator Scott, you're recognized for your questions.
Sec Mayorkas, you're the first cabinet official to be impeached in our country's history. I think it's a sad first for our nation, not because this wasn't warranted, but because it was completely warranted by your catastrophic failure that has created a wide open border. I personally fully support what the House did. I think I've been honest with you that how I view your job performance. I don't believe not just once, but multiple times you lied under oath that that the border was secure. It's not. I think that's clearly a lie. And it's a lie that our nation is reeling for the consequences of your failures. I've talked to a lot of people at CBP and people at ICE, and they're doing the best they can. But your horrific policies make their jobs impossible, and they've been clear with me about that. Here's when I talk to people about you, they don't get it. They say, does he care about the thousands of Americans who have died from drug overdoses because of your lawless policies? Does he care about the Americans who have been killed and viciously raped by illegal aliens that you and President Biden have invited into this country? They say, do you care about the devastation that could happen at the hands of the hundreds of terrorists that have been let into our country? Does he care that even the FBI director is concerned about the terrorists you and President Biden have allowed into America? In my state, they're furious. They don't think you care at all. Just about everybody I talk to believes that America is a way more dangerous place because you have allowed criminals, drugs, terrorists, and other dangerous people into our communities. Just this week, the House Select Committee on the CCP released a damning report on the fentanyl you've let pour into America through the southern border. Here's how the AP reported on the committee's report. The article said, quote, "The Chinese government not only subsidizes the manufacture of precursor chemicals, but the report says it is a thwarted investigation until illicit manufacturers by warning the targets of an investigation when U.S. law enforcement has sent a formal request for assistance. Investigators said multiple current and former federal agents have described the notification of targets, leading those targets to revamp operation and make it harder to detect their activities." I can't imagine if I was sitting in your position, I'd like to hear this, but the government of Communist China seems to know that because of your policies and wide open border, you and President Biden have created that they get to do whatever they want. Now, what we know is Communist China wants to destroy the United States, and they want to murder thousands of Americans with fentanyl. Communist China is poisoning our nation and taking the lives of more than 70,000 Americans each and every year. I assume you know this, but I personally can't say anything that shows that you care about it. There are real consequences to your failure to secure the border, and every victim's got a name. Unfortunately, real Americans are being killed, families are being torn apart by vicious crimes and deadly drugs because we have a wide open border, and we do. Last time on the Senate floor, I spoke about one of the Americans who was murdered by Communist China's fentanyl that the cartels are pushing to our country every day. Name's Ashley Dunn. Ashley's mother said that Ashley was murdered by your failure to stop fentanyl from pouring into the United States. Other innocent Americans like Laken Riley are also paying the ultimate price for your failures. As we all know, Laken was brutally murdered, and an illegal alien has been charged with that heinous crime. Your agency just confirmed that this monster was in the U.S. after being paroled by DHS. Not for humanitarian reasons, but because you claimed you didn't have detention capacity. That's not how the law is supposed to work. What you did is against the law, and if you followed the law, Laken Riley would still be alive. If you look at the chart, it seems like must be over 10 million people have illegally crossed, 6 million have allowed to stay here, and you've rolled out the red carpet for them. There have been sexual assaults and murders committed by illegal aliens all over the country. Even in Florida, where just recently a young man was killed. The man charged with his death is an illegal alien. So let me go back to what I was saying in the beginning. The Republican majority in the House they voted to impeach you for violating your oath of office. Whether you believe that was right or wrong, that happened. You should then have a trial to make your case. But unlike what happened in 2019 when Democrats alone voted to impeach the president and Republicans controlled the Senate, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer decided to deny you the ability to defend yourself in a trial. It seems to me that Schumer didn't want to let you defend yourself in trial for one of a couple of reasons. He's either acting out of pure political interest to protect his incumbent members who don't want to talk about your record, and the wide open border you have created, and all the crime, drugs, and illegal immigration it's allowing, or he's terrified of a trial exposing your failure to a degree that acquittal would be extremely painful for Democrats to explain to the American public. Here's what I don't understand. Just a few weeks ago, Senate Democrats all voted against a bill to stop illegal aliens from getting on a commercial flight with no verifiable ID. This is shocking considering that a recent report identified that in 2023 alone, you approved the transit of 320,000 inadmissible illegal aliens to 43 U.S. airports, pre-approved by DHS through the CBP-1 app, many of them going through my home state of Florida on commercial flights. Democrats voted against deporting illegal aliens who hurt police, like the violent attack on uniformed police officers in New York City by a group of illegal migrants, some of whom with known gang affiliations who unlawfully entered the country under your watch. And Democrats voted against the Laken Riley Act, which simply requires ICE to take illegal aliens who commit crimes into custody before tragedies strike. So it seems to me that Democrats have no problem voting to keep this border crisis going, and it's a crisis, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, and blocking every attempt that Republicans make to stop the crime and secure the border. But when it comes to you, they shut everything down and don't allow you to speak. You seem like a smart guy. You're former prosecutor. Sure, you know how to handle yourself and defend your actions. Surprised you didn't read what they said about you in the House. Surely you believe you have a case to present to the American people on why you should not be found guilty. But you didn't get that chance, and Senate Democrats are setting a new precedent. They're destroying the rules and traditions of the Senate to keep you quiet. Do you think you're being silenced because the Democrats are terrified of your record and unable to defend you, or because they don't trust you?
Neither, Senator.
Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let's just come back to Jose Ibarra, if we can. You know who that is? That's a question. You know what he did?
I know what he's accused of doing,
Which is?
murdering a young woman.
And that wasn't the first crime that he committed in this country, was it?
Senator, as I've articulated previously, I'm not going to speak about the facts of the case because there is an ongoing criminal investigation.
Have you read his parole file?
Senator, same answer.
So you're not going to say whether or not you've read the parole file? I've got it right here. Have you read this?
Senator, I do not want to speak to the particulars of the case given the pending criminal
See,
prosecution.
now, I find this interesting because this is a new answer today. You've changed your answers all over the map on this, and it looks like to me you just don't want to answer the question. 2 days ago, you were asked about this in the House Homeland Security Committee. I've got the transcript right here in front of me. You were asked the same question. Jose Ibarra, why was he paroled? You said, I don't know. You said, I don't know. I don't have the case details with me today. Congressman Bishop says, you don't know? And you said, I don't know. I don't have the details with respect to that individual's case, but I would be pleased to provide them to you, Congressman. You didn't know 2 days ago. Now, interestingly, on April the 10th, 6 days before that, you gave Senator Katie Britt a different answer. She asked you the same question. She said, why was Jose Ibarra paroled into the United States? You said, and I quote, Ranking Member Britt, there was no derogatory information of which we were aware. So you were happy to comment on the case then, on April the 10th. By April the 16th, you had developed amnesia, and today you say you just won't comment. So which is it, Mr. Secretary? Now that we have the file, I'll tell you what the difference is. Congressman Bishop didn't have the parole file, and Senator Britt didn't have the parole file, and now we do have the parole file. And now we all know that the reason he was paroled into this country was because lack of detention capacity, which, as you and I both know, is not a valid reason under the statute. And now that we know that for sure, this is right out of the parole file. Here it is. Subject was paroled due to detention capacity at the Central Processing Center in El Paso, Texas. Now suddenly you don't want to talk about it. This is extraordinary. It's also a pattern with you. So let me just try one more time. Have you read the parole file?
Senator, I'm going to give the same answer, and let me say it.
Well, which one? Are you going to give me the answer you gave to Senator Britt? Or are you going to give the answer you gave to Congressman Bishop? Or the answer you gave to Senator Paul? Or do you want to try a fourth one?
Senator, I will not speak to the particulars of the case given the pending criminal prosecution.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. Well, you certainly, of course you don't want to, because it is an absolutely damning indictment of your policies. Let's just review Jose Ibarra, and how he came to be here. On September the 8th, 2022, he was encountered by United States Border Patrol in El Paso, Texas, and was paroled into the United States due to lack of detention capacity. A provision, a proviso, a rule that is not permitted under the statute. You and I both know you know this. You knew it when you were talking to Congressman Bishop. You knew it when you were testifying to Senator Britt, and you know it today. You just never wanted to cop to it, because the statute doesn't permit it. And so you lied to Congressman Bishop, and you lied to Senator Britt. And now you are hiding behind the ongoing prosecution excuse because it's the last one left to you, because you testified falsely under oath. Then on July 19th, 2023, Ibarra reports for a biometric appointment and was fingerprinted. This is now in New York. The results come back and indicate he has a criminal history. So he's in this country, he has a criminal history. September 14th, he is arrested in New York by NYPD for what? Injuring a child. September 14th, 2023, he is arrested for injuring a child. What happens? The offense was never prosecuted, and the arrest was expunged. I'm reading right out of the parole file. Expunged. Nothing is done to this guy. He had a criminal record to start with. He's in the country on illegal grounds. You have falsely and illegally allowed him in. He commits a crime against a child. He's not prosecuted. It's expunged. In November, get this, in November, Ibarra files an application for employment authorization. And unbelievably, on December the 9th, 2023, it's approved. So this is your policies in action, Mr. Secretary. A criminal is permitted into this country on grounds flatly not permitted, flatly contradictory to the statute. He commits a crime against a child, and then he gets a work permit. He gets a work permit. You want to know why all of the jobs in the last 2 or 3 years have gone to illegal migrants? Working people in this country can't get a job. Their unemployment rate's high. Why? Because of things like this. And then what's he do? Well, we all know. Then in February, he commits the heinous crime against Laken Riley. Is this a record that you are proud of?
Senator, you've misstated some facts.
I have read from the parole file, which you have said you don't recall, don't have, you miscited. I'm reading from it. It is right here. And I've just, pursuant to the speech and debate clause, I have just read it into the record. And the reason is, you have lied repeatedly to Congress and to the American people about this. They deserve to know. And the only way they're going to know is if I tell them. I've just told them. It's in the record now. I've read it verbatim from the parole file. Verbatim. I just want to know, why did you change your story so often? Why didn't you just answer honestly to Congressman Bishop and Senator Britt?
Senator, I am confident that justice will be vindicated in the criminal prosecution of the case.
Well, hopefully he'll get more of a trial than you got. Otherwise, there'll be no justice for anyone at all. Let me ask you something else. Travis Wolf, do you know that name?
Not off the top of my head.
Travis Wolf is a 12-year-old boy from Missouri. This is him. Travis was killed on December 20th, 2023, or I should say he was in a tragic attack on that night. He died some weeks later, head-on collision. The person driving the vehicle, who's now been charged with 6 criminal counts, is Indrina Bracco. Do you know who that is?
I do not, but let me communicate that I know that all of our hearts break for the family of this young boy who died in that accident.
Well, she's an illegal migrant here from Venezuela. Local law enforcement tell me that she was detained briefly at the border in 2023 and then released. And then she commits this crime. Multiple people have been stabbed in O'Fallon, Missouri by illegal migrants. Mr. Secretary, I know that you think your policies are a success. You've sat right there in that chair and you've told me over and over our policies are working. You're on the record years and years saying that. Maybe they're working for you. Maybe they're working for your political objectives, whatever they may be. I don't know. But they're not working for Laken Riley or Travis Wolf or the people of my state. They are, in fact, a travesty. What you have done is a travesty. And, sir, it is long past time for you to go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hassan, you're recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Chairman Peters and Ranking Member Paul, for this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming before the committee today. And let me just note that the tragedies and terrible crimes that Senator Hawley just talked about might be ones we could prevent in the future if Senator Hawley and his colleagues on the other side of the aisle had voted for a bipartisan measure that would have significantly increased our detention capacity, our personnel, would have changed policies for standards of who could seek and be granted asylum. But as the chair noted at the beginning of this hearing, there are people, it appears, who are more interested in throwing rocks than solving problems. So I appreciate the hard work that you did, Mr. Secretary, and your team did to try to help us broker that bipartisan deal that would have improved our capacity to secure the border. So let me just start with my first question. The most important task for the government is keeping its citizens safe. That includes keeping our border secure. Last year, DHS set a new record for the number of people it encountered at the southwest border. Based on DHS's own data for the first 5 months of this current fiscal year, DHS has already encountered more than 1.3 million people, and the department is on pace for even more total encounters than last year. I've traveled to our U.S.-Mexico border multiple times. I've seen and heard firsthand the challenges that our border agents and officers face. DHS needs to do everything it can to address the crisis along the southern border, improve operational control, and track who and what is entering our country. Mr. Secretary, what are one or two specific resources or authorities that you need to improve the department's operational control of the border?
Thank you very much, Senator, for the question. We need more personnel. We need more funds to enhance our work with our partners to the south, more funds to execute more removal flights, to work our interdiction efforts with Mexico, Panama, Colombia, countries along the migratory path. The key, or one key, Senator, is to reduce the number of individuals whom we encounter at the border in the first instance. And then we need additional resources to ensure that we can remove those who do not qualify for relief under our laws as quickly as possible. We need a holistic approach, and the bipartisan Senate legislation that was negotiated would have delivered a holistic approach.
Well, thank you. It also would have delivered additional help when it comes to the fentanyl crisis that we have, and that's the topic of my second question. Fentanyl and other deadly synthetic opioids are causing devastating overdoses in the Granite State and in communities all across our country. Due to the strength of synthetic opioids, criminal organizations are able to smuggle fentanyl in smaller and smaller quantities, which makes it far harder to detect and interdict. What additional equipment and resources does DHS need to detect fentanyl that cartels smuggle into our country, including in smaller and more difficult to detect packages?
Senator, the majority of the fentanyl smuggled into our country is smuggled in passenger vehicles and commercial trucks through our ports of entry. What we need there is funding for non-intrusive inspection technology and additional funding for more personnel. That is with respect to the ports of entry. Those are two examples of what is needed. With respect to the small quantities, we need additional personnel because there is a de minimis exemption under the law with respect to small parcels, and I have visited our mail facilities, for example, in Kennedy International Airport, where we see dangerous narcotics smuggled into the country. We need personnel and technology to enhance our capabilities there. Those are just some of the examples.
Well, thank you. One of the other areas where we really have to push is with the supply chain to the cartels of the precursor chemicals. So I've pushed the Chinese government to do more to stop illegal trafficking of fentanyl precursors to Mexico from China, which the cartels then use to manufacture and smuggle fentanyl into the United States. How are Homeland Security investigations and Custom and Border Protection working to disrupt this global supply chain for illegal fentanyl?
If I may say just a few predicate things, Senator. We are focused every single day on the fight against fentanyl, which is the most dangerous drug that I have seen in my 22 years of public service, and I prosecuted black tar heroin traffickers. The mortality rate, the fatality that fentanyl causes is unprecedented. And we fight every day against this scourge. It is a scourge that is not 1, 2, or 3 years in the making. This has been many, many years. In fact, and I believe it is in 2020 that 57,000 deaths at the hands of the deadly fentanyl occurred. Just a couple months ago, I met with my counterpart from the People's Republic of China to confront the issue of the precursor chemicals and the equipment used to manufacture fentanyl emanating from the People's Republic of China. And we are seeking to tackle that challenge in a very difficult relationship, but we are very focused on the scourge of fentanyl from all perspectives.
Thank you. I will follow up with you on that a little bit more, but I have one final question. I want to ask about the department's efforts to assess two growing terrorist threats to the homeland, ISIS-K's horrific attack on a Russian concert hall in March demonstrated that it has grown its operational capabilities to strike anywhere in the world. Last year, General Michael Kurilla, commander of CENTCOM, predicted that ISIS-K would be able to attack the U.S. and Western interests in as little as 6 months and with little to no warning. That is his quote. DHS and its partners need to be alert and prepared for ISIS-K. Separately, we also witnessed Iran launch an unprecedented direct attack on Israel last weekend. While Iran has typically used proxies in other countries to attack Israel and Western countries, this time it launched a direct attack. If I could just ask briefly, how does the Department of Homeland Security and its partners in the intelligence community assess the separate threats posed by ISIS-K and Iran to the U.S. homeland?
Senator, Director Wray has put it succinctly. We are in a heightened threat environment for the reasons that you have articulated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Chairman Peters, for holding this hearing, and thank you for being here, Secretary Mayorkas, and for testifying before the committee today. I'm going to build on what Senator Hassan was talking about combating fentanyl at the border, because in January I did visit the southern border again and spoke directly with law enforcement personnel about the work that they do to stop the flow of illicit drugs into our country and halting the flow of deadly substances like fentanyl. It's one of my top priorities, your top priorities. I think it's everybody's top priority. And I've been proud to work across the aisle to pass common sense, bipartisan legislation to keep our communities safe. And just last month, I'm proud to say President Biden signed into law the End Fentanyl Act, which I introduced with Senator Scott on this committee, Rick Scott, and Senator Hassan. The new law is going to help us crack down on drug smuggling by requiring CBP to update its guidance for drug seizures at least once every 3 years, and be sure it's up to date on all our new substances. During my visit to the border, I was also able to see how CBP officers use tools, including advanced technology, to improve security at the border. However, I was extremely concerned to see a recent report of many of the high-tech scanners that we've provided CBP officers to identify and stop the fentanyls coming in through vehicles, right? They're sitting unused in warehouses. And that's because Congress hasn't provided the funding to install them. And so the bipartisan border security supplemental that you helped negotiate, I was proud to vote for, did include money for the installation. But some of my colleagues across the aisle blocked the passage of this bill from the Senate. So, Mr. Secretary, can you tell us a bit more about how important these scanners are, this new technology in stopping fentanyl, not just the big packages, the small ones, and how this non-intrusive inspection system for border processes limits the influx of fentanyl? And further, how is the failure to fully fund the installation of such scanners undermine CBP's mission to stop the flow of fentanyl in the U.S.?
Senator, I look forward to working with you on the legislation that you have presented. The non-intrusive inspection technology is an extraordinary force multiplier. It enables us to quickly detect anomalies in vehicles, which are the primary means by which fentanyl is smuggled into this country through the ports of entry. They allow our personnel to do other very, very important work. The failure to fund our full use of this equipment really reduces our security posture in our fight against fentanyl. But allow me to assure you that we do everything that we can with the resources that we do have.
Well, we want to get you funding to implement and put these scanners in, so more trucks, more cars, every kind of vehicle can be scanned, and we can use that artificial intelligence to help us stop the drugs. And so in addition to my End Fentanyl Act, I also was a proud co-sponsor of the Fend-Off Fentanyl Act. Again, was included in the Senate's bipartisan border security package. This legislation would sanction drug cartels and chemical suppliers, which you've been talking about, the precursors that come from China, involved in international drug trafficking. So can you speak a little bit more, building on what Senator Hassan talked about, the importance of not only preventing the activities of international drug cartels, but also the activities like you were speaking about in China, stopping those precursor chemicals from coming here? What more can we do?
Senator, we are working with countries, both partner countries and countries with which we have more difficult relationships, to stop the flow not only of fully manufactured synthetic drugs and other contraband, quite frankly. It is vitally important that our border in our fight against fentanyl is not the first line of defense, but that we stop the precursor chemicals, the manufacturing equipment from either entering our country directly or entering other countries with the prospect of the drugs being manufactured there and imported, smuggled into our country in fully formed development.
Well, I hope these other fentanyl bills, there isn't blocking on their passage as well, because it's important to all of us. I want to move now to talk about the DACA renewal wait times, because Nevada's home to thousands of DACA recipients, dreamers who know no other home than the U.S., and they're contributing to our community every single day. But due to significant delays in processing times, their applications to renew their work permits, well, they're just taking longer than usual, putting at risk their ability to work, provide for their families. I recently joined several of my colleagues in successfully urging USCIS to increase the automatic extension period for work permits from 180 days to 540 days. And this month, I also joined several colleagues calling on USCIS to provide greater certainty to DACA recipients by reducing these renewal processing times, well, just in the first place. And so the USCIS median processing time doubled from 2022 to 2023, with many DACA applicants waiting over 5 months for their application to be processed. So can you talk to us about what are the biggest factors contributing to the delay of the processing? And can you commit to working with me on trying to reduce the times, and let us know what resources you need? We can provide them.
Senator, you certainly have my commitment to working with you on reducing the backlogs, the waiting times. We are addressing the regulatory need to extend the renewal period for work authorization. Very importantly, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has promulgated a final fee rule that will put the agency back on firm financial footing. Mm-hmm. It has not received a fee adjustment for, I believe, more than 7 years, even though there's a statutory requirement that a fee rule be considered every 2 years. Mm-hmm. And so I expect the financial condition of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to improve, for us to be able to hire the people that we can and address the backlogs that have indeed been growing. Despite those backlogs, I must say that USCIS, as it is known by its acronym, has done extraordinary work over and above its normal mission requirements, whether it's uniting for Ukraine or Operation Allies Welcome. It's a remarkable workforce, which is characteristic of all the men and women in the Department of Homeland Security.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My time is up. I have one more. I just want to say a question I'm going to submit for the record about anti-Semitism and violent extremism. We'll submit that for the record. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you. Senator Marshall, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, we saw Senate Democrats set fire to the Constitution when they refused to allow your impeachment trial. You, sir, as the bidder of Joe Biden's policies, have set fire to the sovereignty of this nation, to the safety and security of this nation, in a total disregard to the law of the land. The Secure Fence Act of 2006 requires you to maintain operational control of the border. And they define operational control as preventing the entry of terrorists, unlawful aliens, and narcotics. You know, it doesn't surprise me now when I go back and talk to law enforcement officers in my home state, and they tell me that the crime crisis is so bad, the amount of human trafficking, fentanyl trafficking, and the crime related to those is so bad, they tell me that we cannot arrest ourselves out of this. I could triple their officers, and it wouldn't be enough to cover the cases. Mr. Secretary, how many people have died from fentanyl in this country in the last 3 years, the last year?
Senator, I would be pleased to provide you with that data.
You have, what would be your guess?
Senator, I don't want to guess. But
So you don't know. 250,000 Americans have died from fentanyl poisoning, and that's on your shoulders. How many people have you paroled in the last 3 years? Any idea?
Senator, I would be pleased, as I
You
mentioned.
can't, you're in charge of this. You have no idea. Is it 1 million? Is it 2 million? Is it 2 or 3?
Senator, I would be pleased to provide.
How
you
many
with-
of those have committed a crime? How many people that have you paroled have committed a crime?
Senator, if you would be, if you're pleased to.
Mr.
provide
Secretary,
the-
do you recall a visit in January to Eagle Pass? You were in Eagle Pass in January. Do you recall that
I
visit?
recall the precise month, but I've made over 20 visits to the border, so forgive me for not remembering the
Do you
particular
recall
account.
being in a room in Eagle Pass, Texas, with a large number of Border Patrol officers? Did you admit the release rate was 85% at that time?
Oh, as I've testified before, I don't remember the particular exchange to which you refer.
What percent would you say, or what range would you say are released?
I don't want to guess, but as I've said before, Senator, I would be pleased to provide you with whatever data.
How can you come to this hearing and not know these things? These are things that I know, and this is 1/100th of my job
Well, Senator-
as well. So listen, you said at that meeting, and I got multiple witnesses, that that we were releasing 85% of the folks at the border. There's no way possible that you could vet that number of people at a time. 85% of the people coming in illegally, breaking our laws, no vetting process, essentially giving them a phone, free health care, and a plane ticket or bus ride to somewhere. You say you're protecting the nation's sovereignty, but you've really facilitated an invasion. Sir, this is an invasion. 11 million illegal encounters under your watch. Next question. Why are you mass importing tens of thousands of Venezuelans into our country via parole, knowing they can't be deported because Venezuela isn't accepting removal flights?
We are not doing that, Senator.
You're not paroling tens of thousands of Venezuelans into this country.
Senator, your question was broader than that. The way you framed your question, we are not doing that which you asked.
Are you importing tens of thousands of Venezuelans into this country?
The term importation is incorrect. We have a Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan parole program for those Venezuelans who are paroled and who do not have a basis to remain.
So why are you
They-
paroling them knowing that Venezuela won't take return flights?
So that is false. We have, in fact, negotiated in the past removal flights to Venezuela. Those are suspended right now. We also remove Venezuelans to Mexico, for example. So an individual who does
So
not-
why do you say it's not correct when it's been suspended? That's why Americans don't trust you. That's why Americans don't trust the government anymore, is because you're setting up, you're twisting the truth, giving incomplete answers. This is really a de facto amnesty orchestrated by your administration. There's a reason why Venezuelans won't take them back. Next question. It's my understanding that we have technology deployed that helps track the number of gotaways that have unlawfully crossed our borders and evaded capture by our border patrols. Is that correct?
We do have technology that is a force multiplier for our personnel.
Okay. Again, under oath today, I'm asking you, has this technology been operational since you took the post?
I would like to get back to you if there's any deficit in its operational capability. Senator, I'd be pleased to get back to you on that.
Has the system ever gone down under your tenure?
I'd be very pleased to provide you with that subsequent to this hearing.
How could you not know that? How could you not know what type of, is it been down once or twice? Has it been down for weeks at a time, months at a time? Any just range or thought that you could give us? Do you keep track of it in any way, shape, or form?
Senator, we deploy so many different technologies across the expanse of our department, which consists of 268,000 people. If a technology goes down for a short period of time, I may not have visibility of that. I'm the secretary of the department.
Do you think it's been down for a significant amount of time or an insignificant amount of time?
Senator, as I've previously said, I would be pleased to provide you with the information you request subsequent to this hearing. I will look into it.
How can you keep track of the gotaways if you have no program in place that tells us when this is working or not working?
I'm sorry. Senator, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, how can you tell how many gotaways you're reporting if you don't know when this technology is working or not working? In other words, how do we know that the 2 million known gotaways is a good number?
Senator, of the individuals on the ground in U.S. Customs and Border Protection have visibility of the operational capability of the equipment they use. They oversee counting the number of individuals who evade detection to the best.
But you rely on technology to observe those as well, and you don't know if your technology is working or not working.
Senator, I believe I've answered the question.
No, you've not. You've said you don't know. The answer you've given is you do not know. You don't know much of any of the answers to the questions we're asking you. This is why we need an impeachment trial. This is why Americans are demanding an impeachment trial. I yield back.
Over the 90 minutes here, but I have one senator, there perhaps another one. Then we'll give you a full 10-minute break if, with your indulgence, if we can get through this first round. Senator Butler, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to you and the ranking member for the hearing today. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for joining. It's interesting, the nature of my colleagues' energy and attention when that same energy and attention seemed to lapse when there was an opportunity to do something to provide the kinds of supports, resources, and technologies that were requested, negotiated in a bipartisan way. And so I find that energy just interesting. Nothing for you to respond to, just a note for myself. I do appreciate that this is a hearing about the resources that you need and the authorities required to execute such an expansive role that you are performing on behalf of the United States of America. Let me just, one, appreciate your work and your team's work relative to last week's announcement in the applications and the competitive grant process for shelter services at our borders. I was recently in San Diego and our San Diego ports of entry talking with the incredible men and women who are doing this work every single day, who don't get enough credit for the difficulty and challenges that they are facing. And your office and your team worked with us to make sure that application and grant process was competitive. And so I just wanted to appreciate you for some of the work that you're doing in the context of the request of the president's budget and the work that your team is doing relative to SSP. It seems as if there's a little bit of a disconnect that I wanted to ask you to talk to me about. FEMA requested $130 million for SSP in FY25, yet Homeland Security has acknowledged that the demand already exceeds the $650 million that has been appropriated in fiscal year 24. Why is the SSP budget request so low compared to previous years?
Senator, thank you for recognizing the extraordinary work of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security. I believe we requested $830 million, if I'm not mistaken, but in FY25, I'll have to drill down on that. I should note that the bipartisan Senate legislation would have funded the SSP program at $1.3 billion. We make very difficult trade-offs in the context of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. There is no question that the demand for funds exceeds the amount of funds we have been provided, and that is why we are so careful in the allocation of resources. We issued our first tranche under the SSP, or we announced the issuance of that first tranche, and our next tranche will be under a competitive process.
Thank you, sir. And we'll look forward to just following up. It could be a simple error on our part, but we look forward to staying in touch about it. One other piece that I wanted to call just to your attention is just another hat in which you are a component of the hat that you wear on behalf of our country. Senator Hassan noted that the incredible responsibility of keeping the American people safe. One such group of people are our men and women in service. And last December, under Senator Blumenthal's leadership, there was a permanent subcommittee on investigations hearing relative to the sexual assault of Coast Guard members. And during that hearing, we learned that the Coast Guard had an ugly history of sexual assault that dated back decades. Even worse, we learned that leaders at the Coast Guard systematically covered up reports on the pervasiveness of that sexual assault. And as a result, neither the perpetrators or the leaders that covered up that abuse have been held accountable. So just one, are there suggestions, requests that are being made in your budget for authorities or resources to continue to hold these perpetrators accountable and to support those young women in the Coast Guard who are doing, young women and men who have experienced such assault? How have you taken this on, and what are next steps that you are anticipating?
Senator, thank you for your question. First, the fundamental point that it is a fundamental value of our department and the U.S. Coast Guard specifically that everyone feels safe in the workplace, and that individuals who make others feel unsafe need to be held accountable. That is a fundamental principle, a fundamental value. I can assure you that the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard is fully focused on making sure that individuals are held accountable, that everyone feels safe in the workplace, and that the Coast Guard of tomorrow is better than the Coast Guard of yesterday. I have complete confidence in Commandant Fagan. She and I have met a number of times, and the United States Coast Guard is working in coordination with the department's Inspector General to ensure accountability where it is due.
Thank you. I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to recognize Senator Ossoff for his questions. Then we're going to take a 10-minute break. Senator Blumenthal will be back. He'll be first up, still in the first round for him. But after Senator Ossoff, we'll take a 10-minute break for everyone. Senator Ossoff, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Mayorkas, welcome back to the committee. And Mr. Chairman, I can't help but reflect on what's happened in the last few months in the Senate. No one, and I mean no one, is interested in or takes seriously lectures on border security from Senate Republicans. No one. In one of the most stunning acts of political cowardice in recent American history, a bipartisan border security bill co-authored by a conservative Republican member of this committee was put forward in the U.S. Senate. It would have tightened asylum standards to stop exploitation of the asylum system. It would have surged enforcement resources to the border. It would have meant more expedited removals of those who enter this country unlawfully. It would have empowered the federal government to take the fight to the drug cartels who are laying waste to communities across our country with fentanyl. A bipartisan border security bill co-authored by a conservative Republican member of this committee. And it wasn't just voted down by Senate Republicans, it was denied even a debate on the floor of the United States Senate. Because the former President of the United States, and he said this publicly, thought it wasn't in his political interest for the nation to be served. It wasn't in his political interest for a bipartisan border security bill to be enacted by Congress. The American people are smart
So all of the performative chest pounding today on border security is utterly disingenuous. When Senate Republicans abrogated their basic governing responsibility and refused even to let us debate and amend that bipartisan border security proposal, the American people see that and understand that. But Mr. Secretary, the American people also see and understand what's happening at the southern border. And just as they see the hypocrisy and cowardice of Senate Republicans on border security, they do not see success in the administration's handling of the crisis at the southern border. And I wonder if you have reckoned fully with the fact that you do not have a good faith partner in the minority party in Congress willing to work with you to advance bipartisan border security legislation. You are going to have to rely on your authorities, and it is past time to do so. So to the extent you have additional legal authorities that you can responsibly deploy to control this unacceptable crisis at the southern border that threatens our national security, it is long past time to do so. And that brings me to the budget request, because I can't understand this, Mr. Secretary. It's a $3 billion decrease from fiscal year 24 for CBP. You agree, I presume, that the situation of the southern border is a serious threat to U.S. national security?
I do, Senator. We
Okay, and that CBP personnel are essential to tackling this crisis, Mr. Secretary.
most certainly.
And the President recently commented publicly that there were not sufficient Customs and Border Patrol officers and agents at the border, correct?
We need more resources, and one of those resources is additional personnel, Senator.
So why are you requesting a $3 billion decrease in the CBP budget for FY25?
Senator, the construct that we have proposed is a baseline budget plus a $4.7 billion contingency fund, and I am not certain that you are accounting for that $4.7 billion contingency fund in the gross amount that we are requesting for fiscal year 2025. That contingency fund is really the model is that additional funds would be released to us based on the number of encounters that we experience at the southern border. And so that $4.7 billion must be included when looking at our fiscal year 2025 request.
Are those funds explicitly allocated and reserved for hiring and deploying CBP officers?
They include our ability to hire additional
but it's funds
personnel.
that could be used for other purposes. I cannot, this is an insufficient request of the U.S. Congress, given the severity of what we're facing at the southern border.
I would be very, very pleased to work with this committee and the Congress on increasing the resources above and beyond that which has been requested.
So given the
Senator,
urgency of the need, why did you not request more funding for Customs and Border Patrol?
Senator, we work within the context of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We continue to believe that the extraordinary resources that would have been delivered under the Senate's bipartisan legislation would have been transformative, not only in the provision of resources, but in the delivery of authorities that we currently do not have.
Yeah, and I agree with you. But President Trump killed the bill for political reasons. And it's gone. You don't have a good faith partner in the minority here. Only you, through the funds that you request and use from the Congress in the appropriations process, and by using those authorities that there's discussion of you exercising, only you have the power to address this crisis, and I urge you to act with utter urgency to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. We will now take a break, and then when we come back, Senators Blumenthal and Sinema will still be allowed their first round questions, and then it's my intent to then go into second round for those members who come back for a second round. But we now stand at recess for 10 minutes. Senator Blumenthal for his first round, 7-minute questions, and then it's my intention to move to a second round for those members who wish to come back, but those will be limited to 5 minutes. Senator Blumenthal, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I think whether any of us on this committee disagree or agree with you, your responsiveness to our questions, your willingness to be here, and frankly, your patience are really admirable, and I thank you for your public service. I want to ask about a topic that we have discussed briefly, which is the investigation we're conducting in the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation concerning the Coast Guard. We have an inquiry into the Coast Guard's handling of their internal inquiry known as Operation Fouled Anchor, and I'm just going to be really blunt with you. We've been extremely disappointed, in fact angry, with the Coast Guard's slow pace of response to that inquiry. We sent our initial request letter to the Coast Guard in September for documents. Only about 3% of those documents have been received, and they are only responsive email records. I understand that the total document production volume includes 11,700 pages, largely consisting of investigative records. There are fewer than 300 pages of emails. I know they have other work to do, but this delay is unacceptable, and I say with sadness that it seems to reflect a resistance to coming clean about Operation Fouled Anchor. And we've had discussions with the Coast Guard. We've pressed them on this issue repeatedly, and I would like your commitment to this inquiry to make sure that the Coast Guard is responsive, and I'd like to ask you what you can and will do to ensure that the Coast Guard fully cooperates with our subcommittee's inquiry, including accelerating the pace of its response and providing all documents without redactions.
Senator, let me allow me to provide you my commitment to work with you and the subcommittee in fully supporting the Commandant's commitment, similar commitment to work with you and the subcommittee. It is intolerable for anyone in the United States Coast Guard or in any agency or office of our department to feel unsafe. We must hold perpetrators accountable. We owe it to you and to this committee to be transparent in the work we do to achieve the life of that value. The Commandant, with whom I have met a number of times in relation to this investigation, is fully committed to achieving that value, to ensuring the Coast Guard is better tomorrow than it was yesterday, to cooperating fully with you and your committee, and you have my full commitment.
Thank you. One of the apparent or stated reasons for the slow pace of responsiveness is the lack of the technology necessary to screen the documents. In effect, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, but they're using 1950s technology. Maybe it's 1980s technology. But that's no excuse. If you were to send the Coast Guard on a mission, you would not take as an excuse, well, our boats can't get there because they haven't been modernized. The Coast Guard ought to be responsive to our inquiry, and it will send the most regrettable message if we have to, in effect, subpoena these records from the Coast Guard. So it's more than just good intentions. And I know that you have those intentions, and I trust and hope the Commandant does as well, to make sure that the survivors and victims are vindicated in this inquiry, that the Operation Fouled Anchor
work product and other transcripts of interviews and whatever documents are relevant are provided without unnecessary redactions. And I hope that you will fulfill that commitment. I most certainly will, Senator, and I know that I have approved the waiver of, I believe it is the deliberative privilege, so that certain redactions could be eliminated, and the subcommittee that you help lead receives the information that it needs. Thank you. We are going to press that inquiry with full vigor and priority, and I appreciate your cooperation and partnership in pursuing it. I want to ask about a topic unlikely to be raised by my colleagues, which is Plum Island. You are to be forgiven if it doesn't immediately strike a chord with you. It's one of the last gems of undeveloped land in the middle of Long Island Sound, more than 100 acres. It currently houses the United States Department of Homeland Security's Plum Island Animal Disease Center, but it's also home to pristine beaches, wildlife, shoreline, habitats for hundreds of plants and animals. It is truly a treasure, not just for New York and Connecticut, which share Long Island Sound, but for the nation as a whole. Unfortunately, the operation of the new facility, which is supposed to replace it, a facility that's going to be in Kansas, relocating that animal disease center, has been delayed, and it's caused a setback in the transfer of Plum Island. So the funding has been left in some uncertainty. The multi-year Plum Island Closure and Support Program was estimated to cost $150 million, but that funding is now uncertain. The FY25 DHS budget request notes that as a result of the delay, DHS will need additional funding to cover the cost of the Plum Island Disease Center program. I'm very concerned about the delay. I hope that you can commit to working with me and my colleagues from Connecticut and New York to finding a long-term conservation outcome for Plum Island that will avoid commercial development and a degradation of this pristine and treasured natural resource. I do, Senator. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cinnamon, recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for being here today. Before I begin, I want to take a moment to correct the record on a few statements that have been made related to the bipartisan border security proposal I introduced earlier this year along with my colleagues, Senator Langford and Senator Murphy. First, there was misinformation related to the 5,000 daily entries. It was actually 4,000 encounters that triggered a closure of the border. And once we hit that number, including individuals who enter through our ports of entry, the border would be closed until encounters dropped to 80% of that threshold level. So this number was actually based on capacity. This was worked out closely with Secretary Mayorkas and his team, allowing us to meet our international obligations while making sure that we maintained detention capacity so that dangerous individuals would not be released into the country. Secondly, we ensured that 1,400 individuals were able to apply for asylum through an orderly process at ports of entry. These individuals would not be able to curtail or delay regular trade or travel. And for those who were granted access through our ports, they would no longer have been paroled into the United States for 2 years without a work permit. Instead, they would have been placed into a rigorous and rapid process with an initial screening within 90 days, determination of an entire claim of asylum within 6 months, and these individuals would not have received a work authorization until such time the legitimacy of their asylum claim had been determined. That, of course, are the facts of the legislation, which is contrary to some of the misinformation we heard here today. So, Mr. Chairman, fiscal year 2023 again set a new record for nationwide encounters. This year has brought no relief, with the Tucson sector in my state alone encountering over 340,000 individuals. This is the busiest sector along our southern border by over 140,000 encounters. As you know, Arizona's Lukeville Port of Entry was closed for an entire month, so port officers could help Border Patrol agents in Ajo manage the surge of migrants crossing the desert. That, as you heard from me, devastated the small businesses in that community that depend on international travel. So right now, a normal day in Arizona means migrants are released directly into border communities. They do not have the transportation or NGO infrastructure to manage these releases. There's a coordinated effort between cities, counties, and NGOs to move migrants to Tucson and Phoenix, where they're securing transportation out of the state. We tried to fix that problem with your help and your technical assistance. Senator Lankford, Senator Murphy, and I crafted a bipartisan proposal that actually addressed and reduced the encounter numbers we've seen steadily increasing over the last decade. And while partisans here in DC have decided that having a problem to talk about is more important than problem solving, this doesn't mean that we can just stop working to provide relief in Arizona. In Arizona, we still must continue to find ways to make meaningful policy changes to secure our border, keep Arizona families safe, and ensure that migrants are treated safely and humanely. As you know, Secretary, I helped secure $650 million in fiscal year 2024 for the CBP Shelter Services Program to limit the burden on financial burden on local communities. I was pleased to see the notice of funding opportunity published last week that gave Arizona its fair share of the money available. As you know, this money has come quite late. We were just days away from Pima County ceasing all activities to process and manage migrants. So what steps is DHS going to take to ensure that additional funds are distributed and that we don't find ourselves in this critical situation in Pima County once again?
Senator, let me first state that I was honored to work with you and the other senators on the bipartisan legislation that would have been transformative, not only in its provision of resources, but in the change of authorities with which we would be equipped, the most significant change since 1996, long overdue. We announced with the first distribution last week, we also announced a competitive process for the second tranche of funds under the Shelter and Services Program. We are going to receive applications for it from existing recipients as well as those who are first-time applicants, and we are very focused on getting the dollars out the door as quickly as possible, as fairly as possible.
Thank you. During your last hearing in this committee, we spoke about the importance of the margin of error for INA numbers. And so first I wanted to say thank you for following through on that commitment. FEMA recently announced it would allow up to a 5% margin of error in A numbers, which is critical for NGOs who are providing services. I was also pleased to see that the most recent fiscal year award removed the cap on motel and hotel booking, which we had discussed frequently. In order to make sure that NGOs in Arizona are effective with these grant dollars, FEMA will need to make sure that communication with our communities is clear and concise. So how does FEMA plan to ensure that information is consistent and accommodating given the inherent uncertainties of responding to the continuing crisis at Arizona's border?
Senator, the model that we have developed is to have an identified point of contact for each jurisdiction to ensure that the jurisdiction is receiving in timely fashion the information it needs. If there is any concern with respect to the consistency, accuracy, or timeliness of information, that is something that I would like to know about because we owe it to the local communities to receive the data so that they can manage operationally their responsibilities.
Following the end of Title 42, the administration introduced a series of policies that were designed to incentivize migrants to arrive at ports of entry and to deter arrivals between ports of entry. Of course, we haven't seen the arrivals contract between ports of entry. Unfortunately, it's been the opposite, where we've seen increasing, growing numbers of migrants arriving between ports of entry. So why do you think that the measures implemented to date have not been effective? And what powers do you need to reassert control of the southwest border, particularly between the ports of entry?
Senator, we have seen at times significant drops in the numbers. We work very closely with our partner to the south, with Mexico. The enforcement effort must not be exclusively at our border. It must occur prior to reaching our border. The best solution that I have seen in my many years in the Department of Homeland Security is the bipartisan legislation that you negotiated with Senators Murphy and Lankford. That is a solution that we continue to believe Congress needs to pass. It is transformative in the many, many different ways that we have touched upon just briefly this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and Senator Sinema, thank you for the tremendous work that you did on the bipartisan package. You are a true problem solver about rolling up your sleeves, and as I said at the beginning of the hearing, unfortunately, folks who are more willing to throw rocks were unwilling to actually find concrete solutions. So seeing no other member here wishing to be recognized for questions, Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for appearing before this committee, and also want to take the opportunity to thank the dedicated men and women at the Department of Homeland Security for the work they do every day. The record for this hearing will remain open for 15 days until May 3rd at 5 o'clock for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.